We cheer for the chaos, the fireballs, the impossible jumps, the perfect illusion of danger. That's what action films promise control amid destruction. But what if that control was just another illusion? Behind the polished explosions and rehearsed heroics, some of cinema's greatest action films were held together by fear, ego, and pure luck. Off-camera, tempers flared, accidents struck, and the sets themselves became war zones. What looked like adrenaline on screen was often exhaustion, paranoia, and sometimes real blood. Hollywood sells a spectacle, but it hides the cost. Directors lost control. Actors lost patience. Some lost their careers. And in the rarest, darkest moments, people lost their lives. These weren't just movies. They were battlegrounds of power, pain, and obsession, where every cut was another scar on the people who made them. So tonight, we step into that forbidden space where the camera stopped pretending and the fights got real. This is the story of 15 action films, where the real battle wasn't scripted and the chaos didn't end when the credits rolled. Fact Hasson, Mad Max, Fury Road. The desert didn't just burn, it consumed everyone trapped inside it. Mad Max. Fury Road looked like a fever, dream of speed and fire, a ballet of chaos directed by George Miller. But the real storm wasn't made of dust or gasoline. It came from the two people meant to carry the film. Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron were supposed to be allies in the apocalypse. Instead, they could barely look each other in the eye. The Namibian sun beat down. The days stretched endlessly. Hardy's method acting clashed with Theron's discipline. His lateness pushed her patience past breaking. The set became divided, half the crew silently taking sides. Miller, a calm eye in the storm, let the friction simmer, believing the hatred might fuel the realism. It did. There were moments when neither actor spoke a word between takes, yet somehow, every glare on screen felt painfully authentic because it was. When the dust settled and the film won 6 Oscars, Hardy publicly apologized. But apologies can't erase the heat that scorched a set long after the cameras stopped rolling. And that kind of tension, the kind that blurs fiction and fury, was only the beginning. Fact Hash 2. The Island of Dr. Moreau. Some productions spiral, others explode. The Island of Dr. Moreau managed to do both. It began as an ambitious adaptation, but by the end, it was closer to a psychological breakdown caught on camera. Within a week of shooting, the director, Richard Stanley, was fired, disappearing into the jungle he'd chosen as his location. The studio called in veteran John Frankenheimer to clean up the wreckage. He walked into a nightmare. Marlon Brando arrived on set and turned the story into his personal carnival. He demanded a midget clone, changed dialogue mid-scene, and hid his lines under props. Val Kilmer was worse, unpredictable, volatile, and openly contemptuous. The crew lived in fear of the next outburst. Actors refused to rehearse together. Frankenheimer, desperate and exhausted, declared publicly, "I don't want to be associated with Val Kilmer ever again." And then, out of nowhere, Stanley came back disguised as one of the mutant extras, silently wandering through the chaos he'd once controlled. The final film was unrecognizable, part farce, part tragedy. Critics called it a disaster. They weren't wrong, but few realized the film had already self-destructed long before the first reel was edited. Fact Hash 3. Apocalypse Now. The movie about madness became a mirror for it. Apocalypse Now wasn't filmed, it was survived. Coppola led his cast into the Philippine jungle, chasing a vision that kept changing shape. The rain never stopped. The heat never relented. Equipment sank into the mud, tempers drowned with it. Martin Sheen drank himself into exhaustion and suffered a heart attack before the film was halfway done. The production paused, but the jungle didn't. Coppola mortgaged his home, rewrote scenes on napkins, and fought to keep the dream alive. Then came Brando, overweight, unread, and defiant. His improvisations forced Coppola to rebuild the ending from scratch. Each day felt like walking deeper into delirium. The director began to crack. "We went insane," he later confessed. "We had too much money and too little sense." By the time it ended, Apocalypse Now had consumed 3 years, millions of dollars, and pieces of everyone's sanity. The war it portrayed was fiction, but the one it created behind the scenes was all too real. Fact Hash 4. The Revenant. Nature wasn't the enemy, it was the director's ally. Alejandro G. Iñárritu wanted The Revenant to feel raw, primal, almost biblical. So he stripped away comfort, logic, and sometimes even safety. He banned artificial light, refused sound stages, and marched his crew through ice, mud, and despair. Temperatures plunged below freezing. Equipment froze. People quit. What was meant to be an 8-month shoot stretched endlessly as tempers cracked. "It's not a movie," one crew member muttered. "It's a punishment." Leonardo DiCaprio endured everything, biting into raw bison liver, crawling through snow half-naked, shivering inside carcasses. His performance earned him an Oscar, but behind that golden statue lay frostbite and exhaustion. The production was a civil war. Iñárritu clashed with department heads, accused his team of disloyalty, and rejected every compromise. When snow finally melted in Canada, they had to move the entire crew to Argentina, chasing winter across continents. By the end, the survivors didn't celebrate. They escaped. The film became a triumph of art over sanity, proof that sometimes obsession is the most dangerous wilderness of all. Vertraute 5. Waterworld. It was supposed to be Hollywood's next epic. It became its most expensive lesson. Waterworld was born from ambition, a dream of floating cities and endless horizons. But the ocean had other plans. A hurricane obliterated the custom-built set, scattering millions of dollars into the sea. Kevin Costner, both star and producer, refused to give up. He rebuilt, rewrote, and kept shooting even as his relationship with director Kevin Reynolds collapsed. They argued daily, sometimes in front of the crew. One walked away before post-production. The set itself was a nightmare. The cast battled heat stroke, dehydration, and seasickness. Boats drifted off course. Costner nearly drowned during one stunt when his safety line snapped. It was hell, one technician recalled. The tabloids mocked it as Kevin's Gate. The studio panicked. The budget ballooned to $175 million, the highest ever at that time. When it finally hit theaters, critics laughed, audiences hesitated, and everyone called it a disaster. But over time, Waterworld found redemption as a cult favorite. Still, for those who lived through it, the real storm wasn't in the sky. It was the man trying to command the waves. Fact #6, Blade Trinity. Sometimes the monster isn't on camera. By the time Blade Trinity began filming, Wesley Snipes was done playing nice. Years of carrying the franchise had hardened him. He'd stopped trusting the studio and stopped listening to the director. Snipes isolated himself completely. He refused to speak to David S. Goyer, sending post-it notes signed Blade instead. He avoided co-stars Ryan Reynolds and Jessica Biel, and some days refused to leave his trailer at all. The atmosphere turned toxic. Scenes were filmed around him using stand-ins, digital doubles, or clever editing. When he did show up, the tension was thick enough to slice with a sword. One confrontation turned physical security had to step in. The crew whispered, the energy drained, and the movie bled life. What should have been a sharp, violent finale became flat and joyless. Reynolds later admitted the experience was bizarre. Goyer refused to comment. Snipes walked away from the role, never returning to it again. And in the silence that followed, one truth echoed across the set. You can fake vampires, but not venom. Vertraute 7. Die Hard. No one thought it would work, not even the people filming it. When Die Hard started production, Bruce Willis wasn't an action hero. He was a sitcom actor with a smirk, not a machine gun. The studio hid his face on posters. Terrified audiences wouldn't take him seriously. On set, chaos ruled. The script was being rewritten mid-shoot. Sometimes, scenes were filmed with no ending in sight. Director John McTiernan clashed with producers over tone. He wanted realism. They wanted fireworks. Everyone was guessing. Willis was running on fumes. Shooting Moonlighting by day and Die Hard by night, he slept barely 3 hours. During one stunt, a blank charge went off too close. His hearing never fully recovered. Even the crew doubted the movie's identity. Was it a thriller, a comedy, a disaster waiting to happen? But from that uncertainty came something new. A reluctant hero, bleeding, sweating, and limping his way through chaos. By accident, Die Hard reinvented action itself, born not from confidence, but from collapse. Sometimes, failure is just realism in disguise. Fact 8. Titanic. The movie about a sinking ship almost sank its own crew. James Cameron was chasing perfection and losing patience. Titanic was shot in a massive tank under the blazing Mexican sun, where 12-hour days turned into 16, and exhaustion became normal. Then the poisoning happened. One night, dozens of crew members collapsed after eating lobster chowder laced with PCP. People hallucinated. Cameramen fell to the floor. Cameron himself vomited and bled from the eyes. No culprit was ever found. But the madness didn't stop there. Kate Winslet chipped a bone in her elbow, nearly drowned during a take. DiCaprio caught hypothermia. Extras fainted under the lights. Cameron screamed orders through a megaphone until his voice broke. The film spiraled over budget and past its schedule. Executives braced for disaster. Industry insiders called it Cameron's folly. And then, miraculously, it worked. The ship rose only to sink in the most profitable way imaginable. But those who were there remember the truth. Titanic wasn't built on romance or spectacle, it was built on pain, frostbite, and pure obsession. Fact #9. The Shining. Some nightmares are created in editing, others are lived in real time. Stanley Kubrick was a genius and a tyrant. On The Shining, his perfectionism turned into psychological warfare. Shelley Duvall, playing the terrified Wendy, became his target. He demanded hundreds of takes for a single scream. He isolated her from everyone, forbidding crew to offer comfort. Days blurred into weeks. Duvall's hair fell out. Her voice cracked. Every tear you see on screen is real, the product of exhaustion, not performance. Kubrick pushed Jack Nicholson too, keeping the set freezing cold and feeding him only cheese sandwiches, food he hated to keep him agitated. To outsiders, it looked like brilliance. To those inside, it was cruelty disguised as art. When filming finally wrapped, Duvall disappeared from Hollywood for decades. Her spirit broken, but her work immortalized. Kubrick got his masterpiece. But he also left behind a ghost, not in the hotel, but in the woman who never escaped it. Fact #0. Troy. It was meant to be myth brought to life, but ego doesn't follow scripts. When Troy began, it carried the weight of expectation. Brad Pitt as Achilles, a hero carved from legend. But off camera, there was no glory. Pitt clashed constantly with director Wolfgang Peterson, who envisioned grandeur where Pitt saw humanity. The tension bled into every frame. Rehearsals turned into arguments, words sharpened into silence. Then fate joined the fight. During training, Pitt tore his Achilles tendon, a cruel irony that halted production for weeks. Eric Bana accidentally broke his thumb in a duel. Equipment broke, tempers flared, and the dream of harmony crumbled. Behind the shimmering armor was exhaustion and disappointment. Pitt later admitted he took the role to satisfy a contract, not passion. His eyes on screen weren't of fury, they were of fatigue. In mythology, Achilles falls from pride. On this set, the same story played out again under the scorching sun of the modern world. Fact #9. RoboCop. He looked invincible, but under the armor, he was suffocating. When Paul Verhoeven cast Peter Weller as RoboCop, he wanted precision movement like a machine, soul like a man. What he didn't anticipate was the torment that would follow. The suit weighed nearly 40 kilograms. It took hours to assemble, and once sealed inside, Weller could barely breathe. Every motion was agony, every scene a test of endurance. Crew members watched him tremble between takes, drenched in sweat, losing weight by the day. Verhoeven's intensity only fueled the misery. He shouted through takes, demanded more stiffness, more control. Weller finally snapped, walking off set after another argument, threatening to quit, but the pain translated into perfection. His stiffness became the character's essence. His isolation mirrored in the story itself. When the movie was released, critics called it visionary. Few knew the cost. A man nearly crushed inside his own creation, both literally and metaphorically. Fact #2. Heaven's Gate. Power is addictive. And Michael Cimino had it all, until it devoured him. After winning an Oscar for The Deer Hunter, Cimino was untouchable. Studios gave him total freedom for his next project, Heaven's Gate. It was a mistake they'd never make again. He rebuilt entire towns because the clouds weren't right. He ordered hundreds of extras to march for hours just to fill a background. Horses were repainted, grass re-dyed, and budgets rewritten daily. No one could tell him no. Crew members described the set as a dictatorship in slow motion. Cimino's perfectionism burned through time and money from $11 million to $44 million. The schedule imploded. Executives panicked. When the film finally premiered, it was a catastrophe. Audiences walked out. Critics eviscerated it. United Artists collapsed under the financial weight. Cimino's name became synonymous with hubris. He vanished for years, a fallen god of his own making. Sometimes, the real apocalypse doesn't need fire. Just one man who refuses to yell, "Cut." Fact #3. Mission: Impossible 2. It was supposed to be a sleek, stylish sequel. Instead, it became a duel of control. John Woo brought his signature grace to Mission Impossible 2. Doves, slow motion, and chaos turned into art. But there was one problem: Tom Cruise had his own idea of perfection. Woo wanted poetic violence. Cruise wanted a vehicle for himself. Their visions collided daily. Scenes were shot twice, Woo's version and Cruise's. The editing room became a battlefield. Meanwhile, Cruise insisted on performing his own stunts, including a death-defying free climb on a real cliff with no safety net. The studio begged him to stop. He smiled and kept climbing. Wu later confessed, "I lost control." The director who built his reputation on precision found himself directing shadows of what might have been. When the movie premiered, it was a hit, loud, polished, profitable. But behind the glamour lay a war of wills that no one truly won. Because sometimes, the biggest explosion in an action movie happens when the cameras aren't rolling. Fact Hasson 4, The Crow. They thought they were making a dark fairy tale. Instead, they captured a death. Brandon Lee was destined for stardom. The Crow was to be his breakout, a story about resurrection and revenge. But fate, indifferent and cruel, turned the fiction into prophecy. During one scene, a gun meant to fire blanks discharged a real fragment, a fatal mistake from a previous dummy round left in the barrel. Lee fell. Everyone thought it was part of the act. It wasn't. He was gone within hours. The tragedy was the climax of a production already cursed. Crew injuries, destroyed sets, constant delays, the atmosphere felt haunted. Some whispered about the Lee curse. Others blamed negligence. The studio chose to finish the movie using doubles and digital trickery, framing it as a tribute. But the haunting never left. When the film was released, it became a cult legend, poetic, eerie, and soaked in grief. The performance was unforgettable, but it cost a life. And the line between acting and dying was forever blurred. Fact Hasson 5, The Exorcist. Some directors chase realism. William Friedkin hunted it like a demon. On The Exorcist, the terror wasn't limited to the screen. Friedkin demanded truth at any cost. Ellen Burstyn was yanked by a harness so violently that her scream of pain became the one used in the final cut. Linda Blair, just 12, endured freezing rooms, heavy prosthetics, and mental strain she couldn't yet comprehend. To jolt reactions, Friedkin fired guns without warning, slapped actors across the face, and pushed everyone to the edge of breakdown. Then came the accidents, fires, injuries, deaths. By the time it premiered, 9 people connected to the production had died. The press called it cursed. Friedkin called it art. The film shattered box office records and terrified the world. But those who made it were left with something much darker, the knowledge that the devil they conjured never fully left the set. Behind its power, there was cruelty. Behind its brilliance, there was blood. And maybe that's why The Exorcist still feels too real, because in many ways, it was. Some movies test courage. This one tested survival. During the filming of Resident Evil, the final chapter, stunt performer Olivia Jackson was executing a routine motorcycle sequence, a high-speed chase toward a camera rig mounted on a mechanical arm. It was supposed to rise at the last second. It didn't. The collision was devastating. The impact shattered her face, crushed bones, and left her in a coma for weeks. When she woke up, her left arm was gone. Her spine was damaged. Her life as she knew it was over, yet the production pressed on. Another crew member later died when a vehicle overturned. On paper, they were accidents. In reality, they were the price of recklessness. Jackson sued the producers, revealing a pattern of neglect and corner cutting. She won, but no compensation could return what she'd lost. The film went on to make millions. Critics barely mentioned her. In the credits, her name appears briefly. No image, no story, just a ghost passing through the end of a franchise built on danger. Behind every slow-motion explosion, every heroic stunt, there's someone who doesn't get up when the camera stops rolling. And in Resident Evil, that truth hit harder than any punch or bullet ever could. We watch them fight, fall, rise again, thinking it's all part of the act. But behind every punch, every explosion, every flawless stunt, there's a line no one talks about. The line between performance and pain. Some crossed it willingly, chasing realism. Others were pushed over it by ego, pressure, or fear of failure. So what do you think? At what point does art stop being dedication and start becoming destruction? Tell us which story from behind the curtain stayed with you the longest, because sometimes the scariest part of an action film isn't what we see, it's what it costs to make it real.